Hello everybody, hope you're doing very well today. So going back to a video I made a few days ago regarding like a potential policy for welfare change or radical welfare change in the United Kingdom. I wanted to kind of expand a little bit more on that, but not so much the policy really, but more of the issues that I believe that the main issues behind why welfare hasn't worked, in my opinion anyway, in the United Kingdom, or certainly in England, or rather in places where where I grew up, like Hull, or probably I'm sure in many kind of deindustrialised towns and cities across the country really. I mean there are plenty of issues, but I think some of the main ones, as far as I'm concerned, I think probably the main one is classism really. I think there is institutional classism in terms of the way that the main people, the main, if you like, the elites or the people at the top of government view places like Hull, or wherever it might be, wherever there's been drastic cuts over the years and drastic hollowing out of those places because of declining manufacturing, declining industry, and just basically the selling off of jobs really to have a cheap, whatever it might be, whether it's selling jobs off abroad or whether it's importing people to fill in certain quotas for certain sectors or whatever. It just welfare has really became a source of reliance. It became a source of it kind of became a lifestyle, I think, for a lot of people. It became something that it wasn't obviously meant to become. But I think really during the course of the 90s and noughties, I think really that's when dependency probably really ramped up. I'm sure to some extent it was there in the 80s and 70s, but certainly by the time we got to the late 90s, early noughties, mid noughties, there was a lot of dependency. And I say this because I have first-hand experience of it, and also I saw it for myself with my own parents, with just because you obviously as someone that's been unemployed, you had periods of unemployment in the UK. You'd see the same people. You'd see the same faces every other week, and it just became a kind of, well, this is normality now. This is just how it is. This is. Some people don't even bat an eyelid about it. Some people probably just don't even think about it. It's just like, what? This is just as natural as having a job for some people. It's just as natural as waking up in the morning and taking a shower and brushing teeth, kind of thing. Which obviously is dysfunctional, and that tells you just how deeply apathetic some people have become over time. Some people just they just lose all touch with reality, and they just can't bring themselves to. They just can't bring themselves to build up their confidence again to get back into work. But that's only part of the issue really, because you've essentially got a system there that's built up in a way. Well, certainly in probably the last 10 to, I'd say about the last decade or so, give or take, it's really just become more of a system of really more of a system of discipline, really, more of a system of punishment. I think more than anything else. It's not. It hasn't become a system of really any sort of real empathy or support or confidence building. You have these bullshit, like every so often you might get put on some kind of like if you've been unemployed for a period of time, you might get put on some bullshit schemes and some course of some sort, some confidence building, week long or 2 week long, whatever it is, some nonsense, and it doesn't build your confidence at all. If anything, it just all it does is degrade you, and it just perpetuates a cycle of low self-esteem, because you're around some of the very worst types of people a lot of the time with these kind of courses. Yeah, you meet some nice people as well, of course, there are all different types of people you're going to come across, but usually I'd say for the most part you tend to come across kind of like ex-convicts and just kind of unsavory types of characters, really, not necessarily bad people, but just not the kind of people that just not the kind of people you want to be around, really. They're just kind of they're just incompatible people with you. You don't have anything in common. You think differently. You're just a different, just the kind of people that you could talk to at a bus stop type thing, but you won't want to get to know them. That kind of thing. It's that. And I don't mean I'm not trying to say that that's they're like somehow subhuman or anything. I don't mean it like that. I just mean that like everybody has like types of people that they're like being around more than others. There are certain personality types, and I think that's the same kind of thing. But anyway, this whole pointless, meaningless thing of like putting people on courses and voluntary schemes and like workfare schemes and all this kind of nonsense, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Because all you're basically doing is you're basically saying you're a lost cause, and we have to do something to make it look like we can justify continuing to spend money on you to central government, basically. It's a way of, it's sort of cooking the books, essentially, in a way, because if you can get people into voluntary schemes or on courses or whatever, work experience, so-called work experience, whatever, it makes it look like it's an effective, efficient system, that you're helping people, but in reality, you're not helping them at all. Because you're not providing them with anything useful. Sorry, I have a bit of a cough. And I just don't think it works. Really, the last 30 years of welfare in the United Kingdom have been just one big, huge clusterfuck of a failure, really, to be honest. And I think we do need some radical, bold move to improve the lot of many people's lives. We can't just it was all going to like I saw yesterday Reform had a press conference, and apparently they're going to go into detail about their welfare plans for, I think it's next week, so that'll be interesting to see. But my thinking is basically all they're really going to do is make cuts to various forms of various types of benefits, probably for people out of work and in work, in the aim of trying to save a few £1 million or whatever, £1 billion, whatever it might be, I don't know. And that'll be the extent of it, basically. It's just about saving money. And it's like, I understand that we have we're in a difficult situation economically, and somewhere we do need to start saving, trying to find some money, you know, and save money. So it's like I get it, I understand it, but again, it's always like it's just always the most vulnerable that always end up with like bearing the brunt of all this shit. You know, and I just find it really infuriating because, you know, at the end of the day, it's not about helping people really. It's about pushing money out of already deeply dysfunctional areas for all sorts of reasons, and basically, you know, getting money back over time, and then pummeling that money into more affluent, you know, already affluent, already wealthy areas for new projects or schemes or whatever that, you know, whatever it is. And it's like how is that a way to run a country? You know, how is that? How in any way is that a moral or ethical thing to do? It's like, you know, surely the thing to do would be to say, you know, the welfare system doesn't work. It hasn't worked for decades. It's obvious to see. You know, there's too much waste, too much exploitation. You know, it doesn't give people the things that they really need to help them to not only get a job, but to have the kind of mentality, have the confidence in themselves to want to stay in work. You know, and also financially speaking, you know, make it so that it's appealing for people to be in work as opposed to being out of work. So there's, you know, there are multiple angles to this whole thing. But I think really one of the main reasons why they don't want to invest in these areas, and I hate to say it, but I think a lot of it basically comes down to classism. You know, they see places like Hull and probably, you know, places probably like Sunderland and, you know, probably places like Newcastle and wherever else, and, you know, parts of the Midlands as well. You know, and other working class areas up and down the country around the United Kingdom as kind of less than, you know, as you know, undeserving, you know, the undeserving poor, you know, the underwashed underclass types. That kind of that's my thinking about it, is that they don't see you as they don't see you or your town or your city as worthy enough for reinvestment. That's how they see it. But I mean, it might be just in a very small way. There might be a tiny fraction of justification behind it in terms of like the geographical location of where that place might be. It might be difficult to get investment in certain areas because of wherever that place is. Like Hull is in many ways a bit of a disadvantage geographically speaking, because it's a bit of a dead end in the country, because it's, you know, you can't go beyond it really. Once you're in Hull, it's like you kind of have to reverse back out kind of thing to go anywhere. So it's like, but at the same time, it's also, you know, it's a great city because obviously you've got the ports there, you've got a good rail link there, you know, you've got a relatively good road system, more give or take, and you know, I don't think it's as bad as people trying to make it out to be really. Actually, in many ways, I think Hull has got probably a lot more advantages than it does disadvantages. But again, you know, the media is really responsible in many respects for how the government sees these places, because they've spent decades, you know, smearing and slandering people from these deindustrialized towns and cities to such an extent that you know they've essentially kind of like they've created their own, you know, they've allowed to some extent certain things to happen, but also because of the way that they've portrayed things, you know, it's like they've had a, you know, there's just always this like bashing of like the working classes, bashing of the unemployed, and just this constant stigmatization, demonization of people that are unemployed, and you know, they're all layabouts, they're all chavs, they're all, you know, they're all exploiting the system, they're all lazy, they're all unmotivated, you know, careless, scroungers, that kind of like rhetoric. And it's like, how does that help? How is that? How does that help anybody? You know, it's like that. You know, then that tells you what everything you need to know about a lot of media outlets. That's. And I'm not saying that they're not. I'm not saying that they're not right to a point. There's certainly a lot of people that fit that bill. There's no doubt about that. But it's this generalisation stuff that doesn't help, because it becomes a negative feedback loop, and it just feeds into this notion overall that, oh well, I'm not going to bother spending on any money in that place. Why would I want to invest in a place like Hull? You know, it's like, what's there? There's nothing there. There's nothing to do. It's, you know, it's a shithole in their eyes. You know, it's like, well, why am I going to, you know, invest my own money? And you know, to some extent, you know, obviously there's always that risk of not getting your money back. So, in a already kind of greatly deprived economic area, local, you know, economic, you know, a place where it's dominated by so many different forms of deprivation. You know, I get it to a point, admittedly, but I also think it's incredibly unfair, because it's like you're not giving places like Hull a chance, and you know, and if you know, really, when you think about it, like, Deep is a good example of something that was a good investment, and you know, it's I think still pretty much quite popular as an attraction, not only by locals, but obviously people coming into the city, whether they're passing through or spending some time there with family or whatever the case may be. So the Deep is a good example, or just one small example of something of a success story when you invest and you plan carefully. And I think that's the problem. We don't have enough things like that in Hull. We need more attractions. We need more things to bring people to the city. You know, we need to put the city, not just Hull, but places like Hull across the country, on the map again. You know, we've got to say, you know, this is a place worth coming to. This is a place worth spending your money in. This is a place worth setting up your business here. You know, investing in this place. But again, you know, without the support of central government, you know, authorities are limited to what they can do because they only have so much money. But also, you need. I think you know, a lot of this comes down to unchecked, you know, mismanagement of funding, local authority funding. Unfortunately, you know, it's not just corruption. It's, you know, it's just poor management of money. It's misspending. It's, you know, just ill thought out ideas and just projects that just have endless consultations and never come to anything. You know, just various, and you see it all the time in the papers and things like that. You know, there's this potential project that's being talked about. This is being, you know, the council the authorities are having meetings about this or that, or this building's potentially going to be used for something at some point. You know, this area is going to be, you know, this area is going to become something. You know, whatever it might be, and nothing ever gets off the ground. You know, and so they waste millions of pounds just sitting around, you know, in nice suits and driving around nice cars, and never doing anything, never making the city better in any way. You know, and then they wonder why there's so much apathy and so much resentment from the public towards local authority and the government overall. That's why, because you're just a bunch of lies. You know, you all you do is lie. All you do is make, you know, empty promises. You never fulfill. You just don't seem to care about the people in that city. You don't seem to care about the future. It's not even about now. It's not, you know. It's about, like, well, where do you want the? Sorry about this. Just give me a second. My dog has been a bit of a pain in the ass today, to be honest. Come on. Yeah, so it's just, I just find it infuriating, the lot of it, the whole lot of it, because it, with it, I think, well, for starters, you should never have sold off our manufacturing and major industries to other parts of the world. That was a massive mistake. Secondly, we should never have pushed towards this green agenda as quickly as we have, because we've got vast amounts of natural resources at our disposal, especially in the North Sea, but probably under our own feet in the UK, and I think we're underestimating ourselves sometimes. I think we have to remember that the UK is a country of great innovative ideas, bold. The Industrial Revolution proves that. So it's like, this has been this sense, I think, for decades that the working classes have got nothing left to offer. They've got nothing worthy of investing in anymore. It's like we got the best out of them, kind of thing, for the Industrial Revolution. And I just think that's an incredible insult, massive insult to these people, their communities, their histories, their legacies. So going back to why the welfare system hasn't worked, it hasn't worked because I think there's institutional classism in the main parts of the higher. Not everybody, but I think for the most part, there's a lot of just a sense of that these places that have suffered with unemployment for years now, with underemployment, with limited employment options, and really really crap employment options for the most part for most people, unless you're lucky enough to somehow have a position in the council, or somehow end up working for some long established company or something, or you know somebody, or it's like you end up getting lucky with funding to start a business, or you see, the problem is it's like it's all going well if you know what you want to do, because you can go on an apprenticeship or council, but the problem is it's when you don't know what you want to do, that's how you end up on welfare. That's how you end up in a life of just floating through it. And I can say that because that's what I've done. And that's not easy to admit, but it's the truth. And so what happens then is you drift along in life, hoping that something somewhere along the line will connect with you, and often it doesn't. And that's why the welfare system doesn't work, because it doesn't help you. It doesn't really find out what you're competent at. It doesn't find out what you might be competent at, what you might like, what you dislike, or potentially dislike. And so you just get put up on a shelf for months or years or decades, and essentially you're just forgotten about. Yeah, you'll go through all the bureaucratic bullshit and all the, dotting the I's and crossing the T's and all that crap, but essentially, as far as they're concerned, it's like you're just a non-entity. You're just a figure. You're just a statistic, basically. You're just a number. You're not even a name, really. You're just a bunch of, just nothing, really. It's just like you're just another, the next one in, the next one in, the next one in, the next. You're not an individual. You're not seen as an individual in a system like that. That's part of the problem, that everyone gets lumped with these same assumptions, these same judgments and criticisms, and from people who already probably dislike. They've already got these like wild assumptions, and there's these connotations about certain people because they're unemployed, or they dress a certain way, or look a certain way, or sound a certain way. And so, the person sitting on the other end of the other side of the table, apart from the odd decent person, they've already got a very skewed negative view of you anyway. Because in their eyes, to be unemployed is the sin of the century. So you have to get rid of the welfare system. It just doesn't work. I've already mentioned classism, which I believe is a massive issue in the country. But I think also, when you what happened by way of, the reason that these places have been hollowed out so much is because the things that a lot of communities, a lot of people in these places relied upon no longer exist, or are so heavily weakened that there's just no incentive for most people. There's no inspiration anymore. That's the problem. People used to want to go into mines and go into heavy industries and into whatever it was, shipbuilding, manufacturing, even factory work. People didn't mind doing that stuff because you may not have been paid a great deal, but you certainly would have been better off doing that stuff than you would have been unemployed. So, and obviously at one time there wasn't any welfare system, so you didn't really have much choice. You had to have some kind of a job, otherwise you'd just starve to death. So now, of course, I don't want us to return to that kind of a way of life, obviously, but we've got to bring some things back. You've got to bring a sense of empowerment back to these people. Give them hope. That's the problem. There's no hope in these places anymore. They've just fallen into such a state of disrepair. There's such a state of just more or less like eternal apathy. The people just don't give a shit anymore. People don't care anymore. And that's the problem. When people stop caring, then they stop being motivated to change, and that's why you end up with people being dependent on the system. Just as why people become dependent on drugs, because they can't see a way out of it. They can't see a better alternative, so they say, "Well, I'll just stay as I am then." And then that's where dependence sets in, and that can last years, decades. And they just become a burden to themselves. They become a burden to those around them. They become a burden to society overall, and they become a burden to the economy. And that's where the resentment sets in from taxpayers. That's where resentment sets in from policymakers who have to deal with these. I admit difficult things. Difficult financial and economic stresses that somewhere have to have some kind of a management plan or a solution. But the problem is, my point really for this video is basically saying that those things that they've implemented, they haven't worked. They don't work. They just don't work. It's like you can only manage a failing economy for so long before it collapses. You can only manage a corrupt, weak system for so long before you say to yourself, it's costing. It's like having a car that's, you might like for whatever reasons, because you think it's, relatively reliable, not particularly expensive, but then over time it starts to become troublesome. It starts to become unreliable, and it's just costing you more and more and more money to keep the bloody thing going. So then you think to yourself, well, I can't afford this. There's no point in me having this anymore. It's like, so at some point you just say, right, I've got to get rid of this. Whatever it might be, whether it's a phone, whether it's a car, whether it's a house, whatever it might be. At some point you say, look, I can't just keep forking out, money for this, money for that, money for this all the time. It's just costing you a fortune. And eventually you're just going to end up broke. You aren't going to end up in a good financial situation, and that applies to the welfare system. But it's all going to putting little sticky patches on it and saying, we are managing the economy, we are managing welfare, we're making cuts, we're getting people back into work, we're putting people on welfare, we are getting strict. It's very authoritarian, this. Very almost like get strict, head teacher type kind of vibe thing to it, and you know, that might be good for economists and, you know, the banks and stakeholders and the government, you know, the government pet, the people that are responsible for it. But in terms of like, you know, the mid to long term, it's a disaster waiting to happen. You know, like I said in that previous video, we need solutions. We don't need punishments. We need solutions. You know, it's all going to well sanctioning people and belittling people and, you know, ruining people's already, you know, vulnerable mental health by putting them in positions that they don't have experience for, they're not competent at, you know, they have very little training for, they're not ready for, and they won't fit in. You know, they just won't fit into those places of work because they haven't been prepared for it. And so, you know, it's all going to well like calling people names, slandering people, and you know, labeling everybody the same thing as, well, you're not trying hard enough. You're lazy. You're motivated. You're too stubborn for your own good. You'll create self-fulfilling prophecies, all this kind of shit, and it's like, yeah, I'm sure some people do. I'm sure, yeah, but that's not all. That's not everyone. Some people just don't have what it takes to get a job. Some people just don't have what it takes to keep a job, for a lot of different reasons. Mostly due to, you know, dysfunctional habits, you know, mental health issues, obliteration of confidence, you know, just not having the right mental framework, the right skills, not being listened to for so long, and just being put into places where they're gonna be incompetent. But as long as we get them off the books, as long as we make it look like we've got people back into employment, because that's always a good idea, isn't it? That's what always works. What would work is for the government to actually reinvest in these places, to actually bring in investment, to bring back manufacturing. As I said in that video the other day, bring back manufacturing, bring back industries, bring back jobs, bring in new jobs, you know, bring in new industries, and replace the welfare system with something along the lines of, you know, an apprenticeship / you know, education / you know, work experience / skills system, so that you don't just go somewhere and sign your name or sign a few forms and I'll see you again in 2 weeks type vibe, it's that type thing. But instead, you basically, people turn up 5 or 6 days a week, let's just say 5, and gain valuable things, you know. You don't just leave people to their own, you know, you don't just let people rot away. You know, you get, it's like prison. I mean, people in prison get treated, I would say, even to some extent, yeah, people probably do get treated better in prison than they do when they're on welfare. Because at least in prison, you've got the chances of, like, you know, turning yourself around. Like, you've got options to, you know, it's like you've got a TV and, like, you can get a console and you don't have to pay for things, as far as I'm aware anyway. And, like, you know, you get better. You get lesser names called at you for being in prison than you do for being on welfare. You know, this is the problem. We've made it. You know, we've made the whole welfare issue, and it is an issue, but we've massively exaggerated it. We've made it into this, like, economic demon of sorts. You know, it's like you know, how dare you take benefits? How dare you be unemployed when there's people out there working, you know, paying taxes into a system that would also benefit them at some point if they were unemployed or got sick, or when they retire. But people conveniently gloss over that stuff as well. You know, people don't mention that stuff. You know, how dare you stay in bed until the afternoon because you're depressed and you've got no hope and you feel helpless. You don't see a future. How dare you? How dare you come in here and have an attitude at our staff? Well, that's because you have an attitude for me. I came in here with a perfectly normal attitude until you started looking down at the end of the nose. I mean, until you started being passive aggressive and condescending and patronising and trying to intimidate me and threaten me with sanctions or pushing me into something, because if you don't, you'll be sanctioned. You see, all of these things they don't talk about. To me, the welfare system is run by really people who, for one reason or other, either hate their own class or just despise the working classes. For whatever fucking weird reasons, I don't know, but it tends to be mostly the upper working class, lower to middle class types that work as civil servants in like job centres in the DWP for the most part. It's like you always get this thing of like, well, if this person, well, yeah, but this person made a success of his life. Yeah, and I wonder why that's because of a very specific set of circumstances that happened to him that most people don't have, that most people never have. Yeah, but he came from a working class background, so why can't you be? Probably a lot of reasons for that, actually. One, he was inspired somewhere along the line. He got the right mentors. He got the right funding. He was smart. He got supported along the way somewhere. He was clever. Probably manipulative. Not everybody is. Not everyone has all those things. Success is based on a lot of variables and a lot of things to go right. And a lot of people don't get success because things can go very sour very quickly. Because we live in a capitalist system where you have to be cunning, conniving, manipulative, even to some extent maybe even psychopathic in some ways. Certainly you need to lack some degree of empathy, I believe, to gain success, especially in the world of business and politics. So, I think, when you have a system that's already biased anyway, when you have a system that already has such a low view of a whole bunch of people, what hope is there for that kind of a system? There's very little in the way of neutrality towards the people that it's supposed to help and support. It was like, I remember like sometimes like back in the day, having sometimes I went with my father to the employment office, and even back then, even back in the 90s, there was this very condescending nature to it. It's like, it's very, who the hell do you think you are? It's like it's like you should be kissing my feet. Sitting there begging for your money. That kind of like, it's very almost like Victorian kind of like, just very, very, quite frankly, fucking disgusting attitude from some of these people. It's like, they want you to be out. They want you to be there with your begging bowl. Please, sir, can I have some more? More. That kind of thing. A bit of an exaggeration, but you get the point. So, it's massively dysfunctional. It's certainly toxic. There's no doubt about that. And, it's a system run by people who, I believe for the most part, don't care about your well-being. They don't care about you. They don't care about your mental health. They don't care about what you're going through. They don't care, okay? Because they're there to do a job so that they don't end up sitting in your seat. Alright? That's how it works. Not that, having said that, most of them probably wouldn't end up in your seat anyway. I'm sure they'd find a similar job elsewhere, or somebody in that office would probably help them to get another job somewhere. I'm sure, I doubt most of these people ever end up unemployed anyway, because if you're working for the government in some capacity, I'm sure you're going to have a bit more of a better chance of staying employed in some capacity or other, is my guess. But jumping to reform, back to reform, I just don't. I believe that with this latest defection from, I think his name Daniel or Danny Kruger, I think it is. these people like to talk about integrity and like doing the right thing, but at the end of the day, these people are the most disingenuous, hidden agenda-ridden people that you could possibly meet. Most of them. Yes, there are good politicians too. There are decent people, I'm sure. All sides of the political spectrum. I have no doubt about that. I'm sure there are some people that are trying to do what they think is the right thing, and try to be decent people. But I also think there are a lot of slimy sleazeball types as well. That are they're just manoeuvring themselves to position themselves to maintain their own careers, their own political status, or an elevated position of some sort. And if anybody thinks for 1 second that they're not in it, like Nadine is it Dorries or Dawes, or how you pronounce her surname, and Danny Krug, and whoever else jumps on board before the Conservatives sink for good. If people don't really believe that these people are after Farage's seat, or at least a chance at it, they're mistaken. Because what they're doing, they're using reform. Well, for a number of reasons. One, because, like I said, the Conservatives are practically finished as a political party. Certainly for the next, my guess is probably for at least a good decade, I reckon. But they'll somehow manage to worm their way back in, I would imagine, at some point, just as Labour will, whether it's 20 years down the line, I don't know. But who knows what will happen in the future. But, this is how I see it. I believe that they are using reform to stay relevant, to keep the money flowing in, to maintain some sense of status and power, in the political sphere. Partly to help, yes, partly in the short term to help reform win the next election. But in the mid to long term, I believe that they will push Farage out of reform. That's what I think will happen. Because these are cunning people. These are not stupid people. There's a reason these people have stayed relevant in politics for so long. I say relevant loosely. What I mean by that is that they've managed to cling on to some kind of political status, as it were. It's some form of relevance in the media for some reason or other. Because they are cunning people. They are highly manipulative, deceiving. Political chess players, basically. They know what they're doing. They're not stupid. But my guess is Farage knows to some extent what's going on as well. He's not stupid. He's a smart man. But I think he knows that without these people, even though he probably despises some of them, even though he doesn't want them in reform. But I think my guess is that he knows deep down that if he doesn't have certain people on board with notoriety, with a certain degree of influence, or at least people that know the right people that could help reform gain power and enact certain policies, that reform's got no chance of ever having success, long-term success. Now, whether that's one term in government, whether that's two, I don't know what's going to pan out there. But certainly, they want to use reform as a platform for success for their own needs, their own ends. Which to some extent I get it, I understand, but I just wish they were just honest about it. I wish they just didn't sit to talk. They're talking about morals and integrity, when deep down they know full well that they're only using reform. They're not really behind Farage or his party. They're in it because they see that there's a chance for them to have a seat or maintain their seats in, come the 2029 general election. If what Farage has said recently about the potential of the election happening before it being brought forward to 2027 is true, then these people are getting ready for that, and I suspect probably within a year there'll be a snap. I think within a year there'll be a snap general election, because I think now with what's going on in Labour, with this whole Mandelson scandal and everything. and potential labour, high labour officials, whatever you want to call them, knowing about this stuff, then that doesn't paint a very good picture. And certainly, if Keir Starmer's involved with it, he'll have to resign. And I don't think that people are gonna buy the whole thing of this Andy Burnham thing being the kind of like almost the kind of like Tony Blair 2.0 type figure or something that's going to save, bring Labour back from the ashes type. I just don't think. I think people are done with Labour. I think you might get the odd, you might get a few thousand people that get behind him, but I think for the most part, I think generally speaking, the British public are just about over with the Conservatives. They're just about had enough of the Conservatives and Labour, really. As far as they're concerned, as far as I can see it anyway, they no longer have any interest in the mainstream parties anymore. They're all just about behind reform, and probably a growing number are getting behind Ben Habib's Advance UK and Ben Lowe's Restore Britain. Probably some people are going back to UKIP. Some people might go to Britain First, and whatever potentially other parties will pop into existence over the coming months or years before we have the general election, or into the 2030s. I'm sure there'll be more probably right-leaning or populist movements that come up as competitors. So we're seeing a lot of competition at the moment on the right, and it seems for the time being anyway that Reform are leading leading as the dominant force, at least for the time being, and that's why there's so many defections from the Conservatives. And I won't be surprised if there's more that come from Labour, possibly even the Liberal Democrats. Who knows? I don't know. But all I can say is that I think we should be very, very careful about Reform's position when it comes to welfare, because I believe essentially Reform will eventually, partly because it'll become dominated by. It'll eventually become dominated by a certain, it'll be dominated by people with a hidden agenda, with the old conservative mindset, principles, values, and they will try to twist Reform into that old model. I think that's what's going to happen. I don't think Reform will be able to. Well, first of all, I don't think they're as radical as they try to portray themselves to be at all, really. That's the first thing to say. And secondly, I don't think they will be allowed to be as radical as if we had to take their word for it. And really do take it with a pinch of salt. If they are to be believed that they're supposed to be radical, I think they will face so much backlash, so much resistance from predominantly left-wing dominated media, establishment and institutions, and aspects of Westminster, that they won't be able to be radical. They won't be able to do what they want. I just don't think they'll be able to achieve it. Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know. But I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know exactly how things are going to pan out with Reform and with their welfare. Their radical welfare, policy. We'll see what happens. We'll see what they say on Monday. I think it is when their press conference is supposed to be, apparently. So I don't know. We'll have to see. But my guess is that essentially Reform will be a party overall of supporting those who already have affluence, who already have wealth, who already have the potential to be successful, rather than those who need help to reach any kind of potential. That's the way I see it. Because reform is basically a party of predator and prey. That's how I see it. They see themselves and others like them as predators of the system, predators of the capitalist system. Business owners, people with money, people who come from affluent or affluent areas, who are intellectual, who've got good education, are smart, and then there's the rest of them that they somehow think that they've got a right to prey upon. They've got a right to just exploit and do whatever the hell they want with. That's how I see it. Because that's essentially the capitalist. That's the capitalist system in a nutshell, really. There's those that have and those that don't, and for those that don't, they are the weakest link, aren't they? They're the ones that are going to be preyed upon, used, and scapegoated, and that's all that will happen. Basically, reform's welfare policy, if you can even call it that, will be akin to something like the workfare program, but ramped up on, it'll be that on steroids under reform, but what they don't seem to realise is that the issues that you have in the deprivation and the lack of law and order and criminality getting out of control and homelessness, drug addictions, etc. in these places. What they don't realise is their policies are just going to ramp those stuff up even more. So they won't solve anything. They'll just make the problem 2 or 3 times bigger than it already is. And let's not just gloss over the fact that let's face it, Farage and Tice are very, very well-to-do people. They're wealthy individuals. Now, I'm not saying that they didn't, work hard along the way, in some sense. I'm not saying that they didn't necessarily deserve to have, the lives that they have. But let's face it. They did have a decent education. They grew up in what I guess you would call middle class parts of the country. So they already had a leg up in life. And that's my. I say it again and again and again in my videos, but it's true. And there's data on this. There's psychological studies that prove this. That having the right upbringing or a better upbringing, and being surrounded by people with being surrounded by people with wealth, or at least a certain degree of money in an affluent area, gives you more opportunities, because that means you've got more. You're more able to navigate things better. You're more able to go to better institutions. Have a better education, have a better quality of life, be introduced to things a lot earlier on that can boost your confidence and boost your ability to get on in life much earlier. And if you're already if you're already around people that where their parents already got money, and you're involved in all sorts of events as a child or as a teenager that people in working class areas mostly don't get the opportunity to do because they can't afford it, then you're already ahead. And no, that doesn't guarantee success. That doesn't guarantee that you're going to do well in life. But it certainly sets you up for a fucking much better chance. Much better chances than a lot of people have. So let's not forget that, shall we? Because that is a major consideration. That's a major factor in why many people end up in relative poverty, stay in it, and why many people can't find a way out of it. We're not talking about people here in reform who've come from difficult circumstances here. I'm not saying they haven't had their trials and tribulations, and we all have, but I'm just saying that from a socioeconomic point of view, they've had a much better status throughout their lives in many respects than most people have. And when you've got people that have gone to private schools, you know, that they've already got an elevated status in life, really, in many respects. So that's why I don't think you can trust these people. That's why I don't think these people will do what they say they're going to do. They're not going to help people in already struggling parts of the countries. They don't care about those people. They care about people that have got businesses, that are investing in things, that have already done well. They've already got some degree of wealth behind them, and that's all they care about. And so again, they will do whatever they can to punish those at the very bottom of the ladder, of society's ladder. You know, that's just the reality of it. I'm afraid to say. You know, it's not about making the economy better. It's about pushing money out of certain parts of the country into other areas where they feel that money is more deserved. I just find it really quite sickening because, you know, it's just so obvious to me what's going on here. You know, it's so obvious to me what the potential solution to this whole thing could be. And as I laid out, I think relatively clearly, as best as I could anyway, I think, in that video, my policy idea, what needs to be done, what could be done. You know, but and the thing is as well, it's all going to well shifting the blame onto these people that have already got difficult lives, not particularly nice lives as well. You know, it's all going to well shifting the blame, pointing the finger at these people. But you know, these people that like to point the finger, they are partly to blame for this system. They are partly to blame for the reason welfare is as corrupt and as dysfunctional as it is. They helped partly to push through certain measures in their time in government, or you know, in their positions that helped their prime minister at the time to push through certain legislation or ideas or, you know, funding or whatever, and it just hasn't worked. You know, you can't just have decades of dependency. You can't just have decades of pointless courses and schemes and, you know, expect there to be some magical outcome. It just because it's, I mean, I don't know what else I can say about it. I mean, it's pretty fucking obvious, isn't it? It just doesn't there's no logic to any of it. It just doesn't result in anything tangible. It doesn't result in anything that improves a lot of people's lives that need it the most. Because, you know, let's face it, for a lot of these people, the school didn't work for them. The school failed them in many respects. No, I'm not saying that that's not part of a problem of their own behaviour to some extent. I'm not saying that some of it wasn't self-inflicted. I'm sure that there are a lot of people out there that brought about certain circumstances of their own doing. But again, you have to consider the other factors surrounding it. Why? Why were people so, you know, so dysfunctional at school? Why is the education system failing them? Because it doesn't fail everybody. And if people are misbehaving at school, then what are you doing to address it? Are you not addressing it? Are you addressing it in ways that don't work? Or maybe you're just not. Maybe the education system itself is also dysfunctional. It doesn't help people to reach potential. It's this one-size-fits-all approach where everybody has to sort of do the same things, do the same things for 5 years, basically, give or take. And it doesn't help people to recognise their potential, their competences. Competences. That's the right word. Can't get the bloody word out today. It doesn't help push people towards things that they might actually be good at, I don't think. You know, I think what you've got to do is what you need, really, I think, is a much stricter system in the world of education. It needs to be more strict. You need to have more discipline. You know, you need to almost have a kind of like military-like regime of sorts, you know, because I think that's where it starts. That's where you get the best out of people. You know, it doesn't work just to give people report cards and give them detention or exclude them from school. How does that work? How does that change anything? How does that change behaviour? All that does is that just breeds more resentment. So again, the education system is partly to blame for it. Councils are partly to blame for it, by not dealing with the problems in their communities, by not helping funding the police. Complete breakdown of law and order, complete breakdown of trust and respect for the authorities. Again, another massive factor. Doesn't want to be addressed. Imported massive amounts of cheap labour. How does that help things? Shifting jobs away to other parts of the world because it's cheaper, it's more economical. How is that going to help people that are struggling, that have got very little in you know, the most important years of their lives? How is that supposed to inspire people, motivate people to get up on their feet and be independent and self-reliant? How does any of this shit help people? Seriously, like, how does it help them? And yet, you know, they go to these job centres and go, it's all your fault. Everything in your life is all down to you. It's your fault. Some of it, sure. But not all of it. Because it's easier. It's easier just to say, no, it's all down to you. Everything's on you. Yeah, but it's not though, is it? I didn't get to decide what school I went to. I didn't even get to decide what things I wanted to study. Nobody really pushed me and helped me and mentored me and supported me and tried to make me into something that would be beneficial for society and the world. Not really. There certainly weren't as many opportunities in where I grew up as there were in other parts of the country. So there's a complete lack of fairness. There's massive inequalities in terms of opportunities, investment, educational standards, you know, social deprivation, economic deprivation, declining culture, declining standards, declining respect towards the police and authorities, declining the judiciary system, declining infrastructure, you know, the way that inflation's made everything more and more expensive, you know, technology's taking more and more jobs away, etc., etc., etc. Now, I'm not saying that everyone can predict everything. I'm not saying that everyone can that we can fix everything all at the same time. But the problem is that we don't seem to have fixed anything for at least 35 years, 40 years really, in the UK. All we've done is just managed the inevitable decline of our NHS system, welfare system, you know, the economy for the most part, and it's just a country that's just let itself go. It's fallen into disrepair. It's fallen into complacency, and people have become complacent because of it. It's fallen into just cycles of highly corrupt governments that don't listen, that don't care, that do what they want, of a system of democracy that's highly, you know, what's the word, malleable. It just doesn't work. Nothing works anymore in that country. And then, you know, Reform have got the audacity to complain about people leaving. I wonder why. I wonder why people are leaving in the peak of their lives, you know. Why would you want to stay in that shithole if you've got money? I'm sorry to be crude about it, but it's like, well, why would you want to stay in a country like that where you get taxed out of existence practically? You know, you get punished for the more you work, the more you get punished. How is that fair? It's like, yeah, I understand people, you know, people should pay more money if they've got more, you know, I get it, I understand, you know, the idea, but at the same time, it's like, it has to be fair. You know, if someone's paying, you know, 20 or 30% of their salary. You know, they've worked hard for everyone. It's like, you know, why would you want to belong to that society when you can pay much less? You can earn more and get taxed less elsewhere. It's not complicated, is it? Yeah, and you wonder why so many people are attracted to the country, because they can make probably 2 or 3 times as much working some crap job with crap working conditions in the UK, and then when they send that money back home, it's probably worth a lot more to them in relative terms, whatever, you know. Or it's, you know, it's like, I can understand it, but it's like, but the problem is, it's like all of this stuff. The problem is that country didn't need to end up where it's ended up today. It could have, so many things could have prevented where we are now. For starters, we should never have joined the EU. That's the first thing to say. That was one of the most disastrous things, economically speaking, we've ever done, in my opinion. You should have much more. You need to have a massive regulatory framework for the government and also for local authorities, in my opinion. You've got to sort this mess out. You've got to sort out the corruption and the waste and mismanagement of money. That has to stop. You've got to stop all of this nonsense of paying people ridiculous amounts of money in the top echelons of government and you know, major institutions like the NHS, judiciary system, you know, maybe even in the military as well. You know, you've got to stop this ridiculousness of like of just madness, utter madness. Got to get rid of all this woke ideology bollocks as well at the same time. That all needs to go. DAI, it's a load of shit. We need meritocracy. We need people with the right skills, right competencies, right level of intelligence, right levels of experience, right levels of training, common sense, ability to think logically and rationally. You know, someone that can work hard, whatever ways whatever that means in their context of their work. But the only way you do that in places like where I grew up, excuse me, is by having a system that helps people to get up on their feet. That's the way you do it. You have to have empathy for people. You have to have a certain degree of empathy and compassion. Because without it, people feel like they're being targeted, that they're being scapegoated, that they're being played, and there's no trust, you see. And that's part of the problem, is that people want help and welfare. They don't trust the system, and for good reasons. They don't trust it, they don't respect it, they don't like it, they don't want it, but they've got nothing else. There's less and less jobs out there every year. And as I've said, you know, far too many times already in other videos, AI is eventually going to start taking over. That's inevitable. You know, there's no doubt about that. That's a fact, absolute fact. And you know, good luck to these. You know, because all you're going to do is you're just going to keep hollowing out these places more and more and more until there's nothing left of them, and so massive amounts of people end up having to move elsewhere, unless that's the plan. Maybe it is. You know, to the point where basic services, good luck getting them. There won't be any money left in these places. There'll be nothing left. You know, they'll be like bloody they'll look like ghost towns eventually. I mean, they already do anyway. You know, take a walk down your average high street these days. What have you got? Vape shops, barbers, you know, charity shops, betting shops. Wow, so inspiring. And you wonder why people are angry. You wonder why people are pissed off. You wonder why people have have so much resentment and bitterness towards the government. You wonder why over 2 million people just went on a march in London at the weekend. You wonder why? Really? You wonder why? Is that much of a surprise to these people, is it? Wonder why there's such a rise of patriotism and populism in the West? That's why. Because they've seen just how much they've been played. And they really have been played. They damn well know it. And some people have every right to be angry. People have every right to go out there and protest and demand for change. But if you think by punishing people, sending people to jail for tweets, smearing people, slandering people, calling them far right, you're far right, even though they're just right. All you do is you just cement the idea that they are right, and that what they're doing is right. And deep down, you know on the left that you're finished. You know it. You know you're in decline, and you know within a few years you're finished. You're not going to hold the status quo anymore. You're done. And it can't come quick enough. You've got to go. It's time for you to go. About fucking time. You've had decades of your bullshit. Decades of your propaganda. People don't want it anymore. But at the same time, if Reform think that they're going to win voters, or they're going to win popularity by targeting the most vulnerable, disenfranchised, disillusioned, disappointed, angry, frustrated, etc. people in society, that's a huge mistake. And they will pay for it. Because if you think that these people don't know what your game is, or won't figure out eventually, then you're sadly mistaken. Because they will. And you could say, well, yeah, but we are going to do these things for these people. Yeah, you're going to give with one hand and take with the other. You're going to close the borders and destroy the welfare system at the same time. You're going to increase the tax threshold and then destroy the NHS. And Reform thinks that people are so idiotic, so moronic, that we don't see what they're doing. We don't know what they're up to, that we don't know what they really stand for, what they really are. We do. I do anyway. That's why I would never vote for you. And I don't believe you, and I don't trust you. Quite frankly. But at the same time, what are the alternatives? Nobody's going to vote for Conservatives in 2029 or before. No one's going to vote for Labour. No one's going to vote for the Liberal Democrats. And I don't mean literally, but you get my point. The fringe parties on the right, they've got no chance for the time being until enough people realise just how much wool has been pulled over their eyes, and just how much of a smokescreen and a scam Reform will turn out to be. Then they'll move further to the right, and that's where you will start to see the real far right become an actual entity. I believe. Once you start targeting the most vulnerable in society, all you're going to do is just back them into a corner of frustration and desperation. That eventually they'll look for someone even more to the right than Nigel Farage is. That's why this welfare thing I keep going on about. I don't want to bang on about it, and I don't want to keep making endless videos about it, but it's so important that you get it right. It really is. Because if you get this wrong, and if you don't really carry out the things that you're going to say you're going to do, which I don't believe you will be able to do, then that's the point where I believe gradually people will say, we just can't trust this system. We can't even trust the insurgent party. We can't even trust the so-called radical movement, the radical right, to do anything either. And then it'll just creates even more anger, more frustration, more disappointment, more disillusionment, more apathy, and it'll just become a point where people say, look, there's no hope. There's no hope to do things democratically. There's no hope to do things in a civilized manner. At least not with this lot. And so people will follow the next thing that they think is the person that will bring them hope and change. When we look back through history, and I don't want to keep repeating the same things I've said in other videos, but how do you think someone like Hitler came to power? Why do you? It wasn't just a random coincidence. It wasn't just we'll just vote for him. It was born out of decades of desperation and frustration, and that's what happened in the UK. Eventually, somebody will come along. That'll probably be somebody, along the lines of somebody not too far too dissimilar as Hitler or somebody like that at some point, and it will offer a certain degree of hope and opportunity for people, the most desperate in society, and they will believe in it, and they'll fall for it, and there'll be major consequences of it. But they gave you a chance. They tried to do things democratically. They tried to tell you. They tried to tell you about the ills of your policy ideas, your ill thought out economic strategies, about how to deal with unemployment, how to deal with a lack of investment, how to deal with the high street, how to deal with the potential issues of technology. They tried how to deal with the environment. They tried to tell you, they tried to warn you. You didn't want to listen because you're too egotistical and up your own ass that you look down at those people. They're not relevant in your world. What they say, how they feel doesn't matter to you because you don't live in their world. And that's what reform is. It's a bunch of fucking hypocrites who don't live in the world of the people that they want support from to get elected, to then do the things that these people want them to do but won't do or won't be able to do. And the reason I wanted to talk about the welfare thing today is because it's one of the most important things. You've got to get this right. You've got to get this right, otherwise that country's the country's heading towards unrest. As I've said before, I don't condone violence. I don't condone people breaking the law and revolting necessarily in terms of like being destructive and dangerous. But I think if reform can't turn things around, there's just no hope for that country. None. Unless some actual, genuine, radical, revolutionary type movement or party gets into power. Like in that press conference yesterday, they were saying that we're not a revolutionary movement. Well, you fucking should be. You should be. Because that's what that country needs. It's all going well saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do things much stricter and, we're going to be hardline on these things, we're going to do this and this. Conservatives never did this, the Liberal never do this. We're going to do it. We've got the strength, we've got the resilience, we've got the courage, we've got the bravery. Yeah, well, words are cheap. As they say, actions speak louder than the words in the roots, right? And that's really true. Anyone can say they're going to do something, but take someone with balls to actually get there and actually do something. It's hard, it's difficult. Where you're going to fight, you're going to fear, you're going to have a lot of backlash. You're going to have a lot of difficulties trying to get things through, and reform, I think, will buckle. They will buckle under pressure. and they will just become another version, another variety, another variation of the Conservative Party. That's about as much as you're going to get out of reform, as far as I can tell. And it's not because I'm a pessimist. It's because I'm a cautious optimist. And I think that's the best way that you can look at the political sphere really overall. Don't trust anybody. It's chess. That's all politics is. It's just chess. And unfortunately, it's playing with other people's lives, mostly those that have got the least, and have got, who need the most help, who need support, who need understanding, someone to listen, someone to care to a point, to help them to make their lot better. But they're just seen as pawns. That all the working class will be seen as from reform is collateral damage. I'm sorry to say. They'll use them to get into power, and then they'll just treat them as collateral. Because that's all the Conservatives did when they were in power. They didn't do anything radical to help change these people's lives. They had decades to do it, just as Labour did. Although I'd say Labour probably did a lot more than the Conservatives did. But then again, having said that, the economy was in a bit of a better place when Labour were in power. So that's it's fair to say that. But it's not that the Conservatives could have turned things around as well. They had opportunities to do things, change things around, but they didn't. And neither will Reform, because eventually it'll be dominated by old traditional Conservative heads that they'll threaten reform. They'll threaten to bring it down in some way, or to take over control. And I don't think Farage really truly knows what he's getting himself into here. And I think he's walking into a bit of he's walking into sabotage, really. Or if he does realise it, he better have a plan. And the reason I've said all these things surrounding the welfare system is because they all link back to it. It's an interconnected thing, really. The welfare system is an entity, a problem all of its own, but it's connected to so many other things, because the people that end up on welfare have been... There's a lot of factors that have led into it, often, that end up with people being, not only just being on welfare to begin with, but end up being dependent on it. And that's what I don't think Reform, they don't seem to understand truly what the real issues are here. They're conveniently glossing over or ignoring all of the other factors that are part of this problem. Because all they think about is, how do I save money? How can I make money? How do I save money? How can I make money? Because that's all they are. They're business heads. That's what Tice are. That's what Farage is. They're just ex-business heads, come politicians. That's all they are. So they're just thinking in terms of money, or mostly in terms of money. That's why I have no faith in them.